Americans ate more than 100 pounds of red meat per person in 2014. And now Africa and Asia are moving toward that same diet.
70% of the land devoted to agriculture on the planet is devoted to meat production. That's almost a third of the entire surface area. That many acres producing red meat, pork, chicken, all of that is completely unsustainable. Let's assume that the world population will grow to 9 billion people by 2050. There isn't enough land, there isn't enough water, there isn't the capacity for the Earth's atmosphere to absorb all of the CO2 and the methane that would come out of animal agriculture. The problem is that our focus is on making the meat as cheap as possible. And as they cut those corners, that's where we often have environmental catastrophes.
What are your biggest reasons for wanting to make this sort of synthetic meat in the first place?
The demand for meat is going to increase, and there's no way with the current livestock production method that we can match that demand. So that will put a lot of pressure on food security. If we would all say, let's refrain from eating meat 5 days a week, it would work out fine. But we're not doing that.
We're actually doing the polar opposite. Global meat production has quadrupled since the 1960s, and by 2050, it'll increase by half again. One country that's capitalized on that explosive growth is Brazil, which is now behind only the US for title of largest beef producer in the world.
There's a hell of a lot of resources that go into a feedlot like this. I mean, water, energy, absolutely everything is done for maximum efficiency, and that means that each one of these cattle gets to eat about 48 pounds every single day.
Receber 1.500 animais por dia e processar 1.500 animais para abate por dia. Acabaram de chegar, são animais jovens, vão ficar aqui 100 dias mais ou menos, e aqueles são animais que estão prontos para o abate.
We got in average 1,300 animals a day for killing. They arrived yesterday, so they stay here for 24 hours. By midday, we start to receive the animals for tomorrow for the slaughter, and we keep on that pace every day.
The amount of cattle that they're processing is crazy. It's one every 30 seconds. Do you think that your business here will grow because the US is going to be importing more and more beef?
We're going to be a major client, yes.
Duplin County in North Carolina, where the pork industry is so big that hogs outnumber people.
So this is the lagoon right here. See the pipes coming out? This is the situation. The pigs are in there. They're defecating, so you've got urine and feces dropping through the floor, but then there are slots in that concrete. The waste falls through that and then gets flushed into the lagoon, which is what you see over here.
So that's where we can see the pipes coming straight out of this.
Each one of these buildings has a pipe that empties into the lagoon.
That's a hell of a lot of waste.
Right here. People would be outraged, even suggesting that that's the way we would handle human waste. What's the difference?
From the air, the scope of these hog CAFOs and their waste is incredible.
From up here, you can see every single CAFO is attached to these huge lagoons.
Some of them look kind of like Pepto-Bismol color. That's all hog feces and urine. You do not want to fall into that mess. Look around the aircraft. Start counting them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, and that's just within maybe a 5-mile radius.
There's hundreds of them. There's such an intense concentration here.
It's crazy. So to the right of us, there's actually a creek that runs through this wood line. Look how close they are to the water. Not all of that waste is going to get absorbed into the soil.
This stream is surrounded by hog farms. You see nitrogen and phosphorus levels off the charts, bacteria levels off the charts. It's raw feces. This creek flows downstream into the Northeast Cape Fear River, which is a part of the Cape Fear River Basin, the largest river basin in North Carolina.
You drink this water?
A fifth of North Carolinians drink water out of the Cape Fear River Basin.
It takes about 2,500 gallons of water to produce a bushel of corn. And if an animal eats 50 bushels of corn in its time in the feedlot, we're looking at about 125,000 gallons of water per animal under the industrial model.
The majority of the water that they're using actually goes into producing the corn.
That's correct. And the reason that JBS has a big feedlot at Yuma, Colorado is because there's water. And they don't pay one dime for that water. And they pay below the cost of production of that corn. The corn is the cheapest thing that we can feed because we buy it below cost of production. The water is subsidizing that operation.
So, with free water and cheap corn, the price of mass-produced beef is kept artificially low.
The question is, how much of the Ogallala Aquifer do we need to support an industrial model or any model as far as that goes? And if we are so foolish as to let that precious resource run out, that's a tragedy.
So we're just flying over Yuma County in Colorado. This is one of the huge scale feedlots. You've got 100,000 cattle in this one feedlot down here. Is this all corn down here, these circular
Yes, basically all the circles that you're seeing here are corn.
That's a lot of cornfields.
Everywhere you see a circle is pumping water. I think we have to have a true cost accounting going into these production models. The reason that these big companies can do what they do is because they've got the power to externalize so many of their costs, whether it's water, whether it's the pollution of the soil with the overuse of chemicals in the production of the crops, environmental damage. That's how we're able to get a dollar burger at McDonald's. And we're not thinking about the future. We're only thinking about the short term.
A system that depletes your resource base will eventually crash and burn.
So instead of moving towards the more sustainable model, it's mass production that's on the rise in most places. And the market for cheap industrial meat is blowing up around the world. If the meat industry continues as it is at the moment, where does that take us in 20 years' time?
Meat production globally is an environmental disaster now. If we try and expand meat production to reach 9 billion people by 2050, it will be a complete, unthinkable disaster.
Meat production in Brazil is so land intensive that it's responsible for more than 2/3 of the deforestation of the Brazilian Amazon. But it's using up more than just our land, because producing a single pound of meat requires over 1,800 gallons of water. And that's just one part of a food production system that may be threatening the single most important resource that we have.
Nearly half of the country's fruits and vegetables are grown in California, which is now locked in the worst drought in its history. Farmers here, like Mark Waddy, are getting desperate.
This land has been in constant production since the mid to late 1800s. Never in that time frame has there ever not been a summer crop grown on it until this summer.
So what you're saying is that this drought is worse than anything you've ever seen?
In the history of farming here in the San Joaquin Valley, yes, absolutely.
California has lost nearly $5 billion and more than 38,000 seasonal farm jobs in the last 2 years alone. Without rain, farmers like Daniel Arataberry are being forced to pump more and more water from underground.
You simply don't have enough water. The water table is going down. That's not sustainable. The concern is it recoverable?
As their crop yields get smaller, many farmers are installing expensive drip irrigation systems, the most efficient way to irrigate plants and save water.
You can't get any more efficient than drip. You're putting on exactly what the crop needs.
So you pretty much gotten as efficient as you could possibly be, and you're still running out of water.
Right. Well, now the last 5 years, we've been pumping a lot of groundwater to keep this ranch going. Eventually, you're going to run out. So
what happens when it runs out?
I guess we're done.
But while there's still water left underground, farmers are drilling more wells to get it, some at record depths of 2,500 feet, or 10 times deeper than the state average. So it looks like you're digging for oil.
No, it's an old oil rig that has been converted over for water wells.
So what's business like these days?
Right now, our wait list is around between 1 to 2 years, depending which rig and what size of well. My phone rings constantly, you know, farmers, hey, I lost another well, went dry. I don't like to hear stuff like that. I don't like to see a farmer losing their crops. If they want to stay in business and farm, they have to drill a well.
But as more wells are drilled, California's water is being depleted by nearly 4 trillion gallons per year. That's more than 1 billion gallons every single day. At that rate of consumption, the system of reservoirs, lakes, rivers, and snowpack that replenishes California's groundwater is in critical danger. This is what the reservoir Lake Success looked like in 2014. And this was Lake Success less than a year later.
In the 42 years I've been here, this area here has never been dry.
But even California's unprecedented conservation measures won't be enough to halt a crisis gone global. We're in Pasadena, California at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, here to speak with hydrologist Jay Famiglietti. Why are we at a NASA lab when we're trying to talk about water on Earth? That's because the best data that we have comes from satellite imaging.
It's a very colorful horror story. The places that are red are losing water, and those red spots represent groundwater depletion. Yeah. California is actually running out of water. And our wet seasons don't even rise to the level of dry seasons. We would need to get an additional 12 trillion gallons of water in storage, in snowpack, in reservoirs, in groundwater, to sort of climb out of the drought.
12 trillion.
12 trillion with a T. There's a lot of discussion and hope for an El Nino, but we need to have about 3 years in a row of above average rainfall just to get back to normal conditions. It's happening all over the world. Very, very clear trends. The North China Plain, around the Himalayas, northwestern India, Bangladesh, Middle East, southern South America, around Argentina. Here's Brazil here. So they're having some big issues.
Are there any cities or places that are most affected?
Well, Sao Paulo's just been having a really rough time.
And for the people of Sao Paulo, the most populous city in Brazil, it's a lot worse than just a hard time. As the worst drought in recorded history has 20 million residents scrambling in fear for what's left of their water supply. And with the population expected to grow to more than 23 million in 2025, a drought-stricken São Paulo is likely to see more unrest. And if São Paulo's complex system of reservoirs fails, collecting rainwater alone won't be enough. Behind me is part of the reservoir that serves nearly 9 million people in São Paulo. This is what it used to look like, and this is what it looks like now. This doesn't really look like a reservoir.
It was.
So this is one of the biggest
it's the
reserves of water.
Not the one of, it's
this
the
is
biggest.
The biggest.
5 years ago, the water was, you can see that green area over there.
It's like hundreds of feet from where it is now.
Yes, 5 years with less water than the average.
So there's a general trend in the weather pattern here that there has been less precipitation than ever before.
Yes. Water is everywhere in our lives, but we only think about water when the water disappears.
3 metros de espelho d'água. O reservatório que ainda sobrou água, ele abaixa de 5 a 6 centímetros por dia. Ela não vai aguentar muito tempo.
The water that irrigates 70% of South America comes from the Amazon. Otherwise, this area would be a desert. If you deforest it, you lose rainfall.
So the trees are actually fighting
the drought.
Fighting the drought.
Exactly. They're fighting the drought. In the South America, you have the Amazon here producing humongous amount of moisture, pumping invisible water vapor in the atmosphere. The ecosystem knows that pumping water into the atmosphere will lower pressure, pull moist air from the ocean, and counter the drought. As air masses go over the Amazon, they generate the river. It's a flying river. But we have lost, in the Brazilian Amazon, 47% of the forest. Basically, it spells doom for the whole planet. If the Amazon goes, then the Congo goes, and then the Southeast Asia, all the tropical belt forest goes. We have a global civilization. It's the Earth, and we are screwing it. Problem with all of this, few people know too much, and most people know too little.
This crisis has water's value as a commodity skyrocketed.
Water demand is going to exceed water supply as investors bet on water becoming the new oil.
Large-scale agricultural investors bought up an estimated 500 million acres of land across the developing world between 2000 and 2010.
We will see the emergence of hydrogeopolitics, right? We'll see strategizing for water. It will become the central resource that we covet and that we fight to protect. We have a global water crisis. I don't actually think that it's likely to ever disappear. We've been fixated on the other resources like oil, energy. This one has been sneaking up to take the top position. Without water, there's no food. Without water, there's no energy. Without water, there's no life. Where are we going to be 50 years from now if we don't take any action? We'll be in the post-apocalypse. The apocalypse will have happened.